The liar paradox is a classic logical and philosophical puzzle that arises from self-reference. Its simplest form is the sentence, "This statement is false." If the statement is true, then it must be false as it claims. But if it is false, then it must actually be true. This creates a loop with no clear resolution, challenging the basic principle that every statement must be either true or false. Originating with the ancient Greek philosopher Epimenides, who declared that all Cretans are liars, the paradox has puzzled thinkers for centuries. It highlights limitations in language and logic, showing how self-referential statements can create contradictions. Philosophers like Alfred Tarski addressed it by suggesting that statements about truth require a separate, metalanguage, to avoid circularity. Beyond logic, the paradox reflects human experiences of self-deception, honesty, and identity, reminding us that truth is often more complex than it seems. The Barber paradox. The Barber paradox is a famous logical problem formulated by the philosopher Bertrand Russell. It illustrates a contradiction that arises from self-reference. The paradox imagines a town with a barber who shaves everyone who does not shave themselves. The question is, who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, then according to the rule, he should not shave himself. But if he does not shave himself, then he must shave himself. This creates a logical contradiction with no clear solution. The Barber paradox highlights the limitations of naive set theory and the challenges of defining sets that include or exclude themselves. It is closely related to Russell's paradox, which questions whether a set can contain itself. Beyond mathematics, the paradox has philosophical implications about self-reference, rules, and language. It reminds us that certain logical systems break down when statements refer to themselves, challenging our understanding of consistency and truth. Russell's paradox. Russell's paradox, discovered by Bertrand Russell, is a key problem in logic and set theory. It considers the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. The question is, does this set contain itself? If it does, then it should not contain itself, and if it does not, then it must contain itself. This creates a logical contradiction that exposes flaws in naive set theory. The paradox showed that unrestricted set formation can lead to inconsistencies, inspiring more rigorous systems like Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory. Beyond mathematics, it illustrates the dangers of self-reference and circular definitions in language and logic. Russell's paradox highlights the limits of certain ideas and continues to influence philosophy, mathematics, and the study of formal reasoning, reminding us that even simple concepts can contain deep logical challenges. Epimenides paradox. The Epimenides paradox is one of the earliest known logical paradoxes, originating from ancient Greece. Epimenides, a Cretan philosopher, reportedly said, "All Cretans are liars." The paradox arises because Epimenides himself was a Cretan. If he is telling the truth, then as a Cretan he must be lying, making his statement false. But if he is lying, then some Cretans must tell the truth, so his statement is partially true. This creates a self-referential loop that challenges our understanding of truth and falsehood. The paradox illustrates the complexities of self-reference and influenced later logical problems, including the liar paradox. Beyond formal logic, it raises philosophical questions about language, honesty, and reasoning. Even a simple statement can reveal deep contradictions, showing that truth is not always straightforward. Unexpected hanging paradox. The unexpected hanging paradox is a logical and philosophical puzzle about prediction and surprise. A judge tells a prisoner that he will be hanged on one day of the coming week, but the execution will be a surprise. The prisoner will not know the day in advance. The prisoner reasons that he cannot be hanged on the last day, because if he reaches that day alive, he would expect it. Using similar logic, he eliminates each day of the week. Convinced he cannot be executed, he is surprised when the execution occurs on an unexpected day. This paradox highlights contradictions in reasoning about knowledge, expectation, and self-reference. It challenges the idea that we can perfectly predict future events based on logic alone. Philosophically, it explores the tension between certainty and surprise, showing that even rational reasoning can fail when knowledge and anticipation are involved. Paradox. Moore's paradox, named after philosopher G. E. Moore, occurs when someone says, "It is raining, but I don't believe it is raining." While the statement could be factually true, the combination is paradoxical because it conflicts with the speaker's own belief. The paradox is not about truth or falsity, but about the tension between belief and assertion. It shows how language and reasoning can produce subtle contradictions. The speaker asserts a fact while denying belief in it, creating a situation that feels logically impossible even if factually accurate. Moore's paradox is important in philosophy, particularly in epistemology and the philosophy of mind, because it demonstrates that some contradictions arise from the interaction between beliefs, knowledge, and speech. It reminds us that truth and belief are not always perfectly aligned, revealing complexities in human reasoning and communication. Curry's paradox. Curry's paradox is a logical paradox that arises from self-referential statements in formal logic. It involves a sentence that essentially says, if this sentence is true, then Santa Claus exists. The paradox occurs because if the sentence is true, then its consequence, Santa Claus exists, must also be true. But if the sentence is false, then it still seems to create a situation where the logic implies the consequence is true. This creates a contradiction without relying on negation, unlike the liar paradox. Curry's paradox highlights the dangers of self-reference in logical systems and shows that seemingly innocuous conditional statements can lead to inconsistencies. Philosophers and logicians study it to understand the limits of formal reasoning and the principles of implication. It demonstrates that self-referential statements can generate unexpected conclusions, challenging assumptions about truth, logic, and the foundations of mathematics and philosophy. Ship of Theseus. The Ship of Theseus is a classic philosophical paradox about identity and change. It asks, if a ship has all of its parts gradually replaced over time, is it still the same ship? If each plank, sail, and nail is replaced, at what point does it become a new ship? Conversely, if the old parts are collected and reassembled, which ship is the original? This paradox explores fundamental questions about identity, persistence, and essence. It challenges our intuition about what it means for something to remain the same over time. The Ship of Theseus has implications beyond ships, applying to humans, objects, and even ideas. Our bodies and minds change constantly, yet we consider ourselves the same person. Philosophers use this paradox to examine continuity, selfhood, and the criteria for identity, showing that questions of sameness are often more complex than they appear. Sorite's paradox. The Sorite's paradox, or paradox of the heap, explores vagueness and the difficulty of defining boundaries. It asks, if you remove grains from a heap of sand one by one, at what point does it stop being a heap? Conversely, if you start with a single grain, when does it become a heap? This paradox highlights how gradual changes challenge clear definitions. Philosophers study the Sorite's paradox to understand language, logic, and concepts. It shows that not every statement can be easily classified as true or false. The paradox applies beyond sand, influencing debates about age, morality, health, and other areas where vague boundaries exist. Ultimately, the Sorite's paradox demonstrates the limitations of words and classification, reminding us that everyday concepts often resist precision. It encourages reflection on how we judge gradual changes and the assumptions behind our reasoning. Zeno's paradoxes. Zeno's paradoxes, created by the Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea, explore motion, change, and infinity. One famous example, Achilles and the tortoise, asks how a faster runner can overtake a slower one with a head start. Each time Achilles reaches the tortoise's previous position, the tortoise has moved ahead, making overtaking seem impossible. Another, the dichotomy paradox, suggests that reaching a destination requires crossing infinitely many halfway points, so motion appears impossible. These paradoxes challenge our understanding of space, time, and continuity. They show that intuition about motion can conflict with logical reasoning. While mathematics, through limits and calculus, resolves these puzzles, they remain important philosophically. Zeno's paradoxes highlight the complexities of reasoning about infinity and change, showing that even familiar concepts like motion can be deeply puzzling. Grandfather paradox. The grandfather paradox is a famous time travel paradox that explores causality and logical consistency. It asks, what happens if a person travels back in time and kills their grandfather before he has children? If the grandfather dies, the time traveler would never have been born, making it impossible for them to go back and commit the act. This creates a logical contradiction, as the event both happens and does not happen. The paradox highlights the difficulties of time travel, causality, and self-consistency. It raises questions about whether the past can be changed or if certain events are fixed. Philosophers and physicists use it to explore theories of time, including branching timelines, parallel universes, and closed causal loops. Ultimately, the grandfather paradox shows that altering the past can create contradictions, emphasizing the complex relationship between time, cause, and effect. It remains a central puzzle in both philosophy and science fiction. Preface paradox. The preface paradox is a problem in logic and epistemology that highlights tensions between belief and knowledge. An author writes a book, believing each statement to be true, yet in the preface admits that the book probably contains errors. This appears contradictory. The author fully believes individual claims but also accepts that some are likely false. The paradox illustrates the conflict between rational belief in specifics and acknowledgement of fallibility. It raises questions about how we justify beliefs under uncertainty and how we reason about our own knowledge. Philosophers study it to explore consistency, rationality, and meta-knowledge, knowledge about knowledge itself. Ultimately, the preface paradox shows that it is rational to hold beliefs that seem inconsistent collectively. It highlights the complexity of human reasoning and the inevitability of error in knowledge. Lottery paradox. The lottery paradox is a problem in logic and epistemology about rational belief and probability. In a fair lottery with many tickets, it seems reasonable to believe that each ticket will lose. However, if you apply this belief to all tickets, you must conclude that no ticket will win, which is impossible. This creates a contradiction. Individually rational beliefs lead to an irrational overall conclusion. The paradox highlights tensions between rationality, belief, and probability. It shows that what seems reasonable for individual cases can produce inconsistencies when considered collectively. Philosophers use it to examine limits of reasoning under uncertainty and how we justify beliefs in probabilistic situations. Ultimately, the lottery paradox demonstrates that even logical reasoning can lead to unexpected contradictions, revealing challenges in human judgment and decision-making. Newcomb's paradox. Newcomb's paradox is a philosophical problem about prediction, free will, and rational decision-making. A player faces two boxes, Box A, which is transparent and contains $1,000, and Box B, which is opaque and contains either $1 million or nothing. A predictor, who has historically been almost always accurate, has already placed money in Box B based on whether they predicted the player will take only Box B or both boxes. The player must choose, take only Box B or take both boxes. The paradox arises because two principles conflict. Expected utility reasoning suggests taking only Box B maximizes potential gain, trusting the predictor. Dominance reasoning suggests taking both boxes guarantees an extra $1,000 regardless of the prediction. Newcomb's paradox challenges our understanding of rational choice, prediction, and free will, highlighting how future expectations can influence present decisions. It remains central in debates on decision theory and philosophy of action. Paradox of tolerance. The paradox of tolerance, introduced by Karl Popper, examines the limits of tolerance in society. If a society is completely tolerant, it risks allowing intolerant groups to gain power and destroy that very tolerance. To survive, a tolerant society must sometimes oppose intolerance, even if it means restricting certain freedoms. This paradox highlights the tension between freedom and protection. Absolute tolerance can undermine the values it aims to preserve, showing that limits are sometimes necessary to maintain a fair and safe society. Philosophers and political theorists use it to explore the boundaries of tolerance, especially in democratic and multicultural contexts. Ultimately, the paradox of tolerance reveals that preserving liberty and fairness may require principled restrictions on intolerance, emphasizing the delicate balance needed for a stable society. Paradox of choice. The paradox of choice, popularized by psychologist Barry Schwartz, explores how having too many options can create anxiety and reduce satisfaction. While freedom of choice is generally seen as positive, an excess of options can lead to decision paralysis, fear of making the wrong choice, and regret after deciding. For example, choosing from hundreds of products or career paths may feel overwhelming rather than liberating. The paradox challenges the assumption that more choices always lead to greater happiness. Psychologists have found that limiting options can improve decision-making, increase satisfaction, and reduce stress. It also highlights human tendencies like overthinking, perfectionism, and comparison with others. Ultimately, the paradox of choice shows that too much freedom can be counterproductive. It reveals that balancing variety with simplicity is key to well-being and that sometimes, fewer options lead to more happiness.